Hi, I'm Angela, and welcome to Food, the Other Love Language. This is our first episode, and we're going to be making chicken enchilada casserole. This is a fun recipe because I used to make this for my family with leftover turkey meat from Thanksgiving or Christmas. So that is how this recipe was born originally, and it's just kind of evolved over time. So with chicken enchilada casserole, of course, what you have to start with is the chicken. I prefer to work with skinless, boneless meat, but you don't have to do that. You can use whatever you would like. But in order to kind of get more bang for my buck, I like to season the meat really well and cover it with water and then bring it up to a simmer until the meat is done. And then I can use that liquid as my stock later on in the recipe for the sauce. So let's go ahead and add our spices. This is a combination here of 2 tablespoons of garlic and 1 tablespoon of onion powder. So I realize that sounds like a lot, but you're also adding quite a bit of liquid to this, and you are also going to shred up this meat. And all this meat needs to be flavored throughout. And it's going into a bigger recipe, so it's not going to be too much. And what I just added was a half a teaspoon of cumin. And you can increase that or decrease that if you'd like, but it's a great spice to use in any Mexican dish. It just gives that perfect Mexican flavor combined with, of course, the garlic and the onion. And then I have a secret ingredient that I use in lots and lots of recipes, and it is this wonderful stuff. It's this chicken bouillon powder, and this is my favorite brand also, Knorr. I'm not sponsored by anybody. This is my first episode, but I'm going to tell you, this is a really big secret for me that I use in lots of stuff. And instead of just using salt, I'll use this a lot of times, particularly for anything that's chicken flavored. And I'll add a good heaping tablespoon. And then again, that just gives that water a lot of flavor, and it will flavor the chicken. Okay, so now we'll just cover this chicken with barely enough water to just cover it, and then we'll bring it to a simmer and we'll let that go until the meat is fully cooked. Okay, it looks like our meat has come to a boil, so what I'd like to do is just kind of come in here and make sure that it's pretty well submerged in the liquid. And I might even add just a little bit more because I want to make sure that the chicken cooks through pretty evenly. So we don't want the stuff that's in the water to cook and the stuff that's out of the water kind of need to cook a little bit longer. But what you want to do always is after it comes to a boil, you want to turn it down to a simmer, and then you just let it simmer for probably 15 to 20 minutes until the chicken's completely done. Okay, so while the meat is simmering and getting all the way cooked, we're going to go ahead and build the sauce. What I like to put in this sauce is green enchilada sauce, and I like to use a big can. It's 28 ounces. Okay, so it's quite a bit of sauce. If you don't have the large can, sometimes this is a difficult product to find, the green enchilada sauce. Sometimes you can only find the red, but I'm telling you, the green is important. A lot of stores will only carry this smaller sized can. So this large can is a little bit more than 2 of the small cans. Each one of these cans is 10 ounces. So 3 of these roughly is the same as 1 of the large cans. We're just going to use the large can today. So go ahead and we'll put that in our bowl. Okay, and then I include a can of cream of chicken soup, and it doesn't matter what brand. Now the cool thing about this recipe is you can do a gluten-free or a dairy-free or a gluten-free dairy-free version, which I did recently for a coworker of mine. So what I did was to make her green sauce. Unfortunately, this product does have gluten in it. Now you might be able to go to Whole Foods or somewhere and find a green enchilada sauce that is gluten-free, but I think they add it to make it a little bit thicker. So you may be able to find a version of it that does not have that ingredient. But if you wanted to make your own, what I did was I took the green chilies, which have a very similar flavor, and I used an immersion blender, and I combined the chilies with some almond milk because it's kind of a creamy sauce when you add that cream of chicken soup. So if you add the almond milk and you put this with it and then you use the immersion blender, this is what an immersion blender looks like. If you have never used one, you should. They're amazing. They're not expensive, and they can make anything that is soft but chunky into a beautiful sauce. So if you're not familiar with what they do, I encourage you to check it out. Okay, so we just need to incorporate these ingredients. Now, one other thing I want to tell you about the enchilada sauce is that this is mild. Now, sometimes if it's a part of the country where there's a lot of people that buy these types of ingredients, you're going to have a variety of brands and you're going to have different hotness levels to choose from, right? So this is mild, but they do have a hot version that is made. It's just that it's just not very popular in some parts of the country. So if you want to spice it up, go ahead and add some hot sauce to it. I won't for this recipe today, but you can always add hot sauce, make it as hot as you want. And then we will be using the liquid that the chicken is currently boiling in with all of those yummy spices, and we'll incorporate that liquid with this, and that will be our completed sauce. And another thing you can do with the chilies, what I'm actually going to do, rather than adding these to my sauce, I'm going to add these to the meat after the meat is shredded, just to give the meat even more flavor. So I'm going to put these aside and we'll add those to my shredded chicken in a little bit. It looks like our meat is about ready, so we're just going to turn this off and we will move this into a bowl so that we can get to the liquid. And we're going to be letting the meat cool in the meantime. Now, a couple things to know about the meat is that the thigh meat really is impossible to overcook. It's always going to be moist, and it's a wonderful, it's got a lot of flavor. Some people don't like it because it's not quite as lean, not as healthy, and it doesn't shred as cleanly as breast meat does. So the breasts are always going to be a little bit bigger, but they will cook a little faster than the thighs. I just like to have a combination because breast meat doesn't have quite as much flavor as the thigh meat does. And a couple of other things to keep in mind when you are starting your boiling of the raw meat. If you bring the meat down to room temperature before you start boiling it, it will cook more evenly. But if you start with the meat cold, or sometimes you might even end up doing it frozen, it's just going to cook on the outside before it cooks on the inside. Like it's going to be raw on the inside, even though it looks cooked on the outside. So you always want to look in the middle and be sure it's all the way cooked. And I would recommend, if you're starting with frozen meat, maybe do it in a crock pot or put it in at a really low temperature once it comes to a boil and just let it go for a couple of hours if you're home. That'll make your house smell wonderful and people will be like, oh, what are you cooking? But it's just something to think about when you're boiling raw meat. It just cooks more evenly if you start it when it's at room temperature. So it looks like we have a little bit more liquid than we need, but we don't want to get rid of it, obviously, because it's got all the flavor. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on, and I'm going to reduce this. And all reducing is, I'm sure a lot of you know, so those of you that know how to cook, bear with me. All reducing is taking a liquid and boiling it so that some of it evaporates. You're keeping all the flavor, but you're getting rid of some of the liquid. So it just reduces the quantity, but it keeps all the flavor. Okay, so now our chicken meat is all cooled and our liquid has been reduced. And I'm gonna build our sauce right in this pan so that way we're retaining all of the flavor that we got from the chicken that might be on the pan. So again, we're not losing any flavor this way. So we'll take the two ingredients that we put, the green enchilada sauce and the cream soup, and we're gonna go ahead and put this in here. But an alternative, if you don't feel like you have enough liquid for some reason, you can use things like white wine, or you can use store-bought chicken stock to add additional liquid so that you have enough sauce. This sauce is pretty important. Once our meat is shredded with the green chilies incorporated, we'll go ahead and start building our casserole. This is actually a really fun task that you can have your little ones help you with. After the meat is separated from the liquid and cooled, they won't burn their little hands on it, and they can just keep you company in the kitchen while you build the sauce, and it gives them an opportunity to spend quality time with you, to be involved in the dinner that night, and to be invested in how it turns out. You know, they're a lot more likely to try new foods if they are involved in helping to make it, so they'll feel a sense of pride, and it's just a really easy thing to have the little ones do. And I realize that there might be faster ways of doing it, but in order for it to be how I like it to be, I like to do it by hand. But some people use forks, some people maybe would just chop it up, but again, doing it by hand like this, it's a nice way to let the kids help. Even the teenagers, they don't have to be little ones. Okay, so now we've got all of the chicken shredded, and it actually made more than I thought it was going to make. It's about 7.5, almost 8 cups of shredded chicken. And I used 2 large chicken breasts and 4 chicken thighs, all boneless and skinless. So if you have less meat on hand and you end up with less meat, that'll probably still work. But let's go ahead and start assembling our casserole. So I also want to show you the tortillas that I use. So I use corn tortillas because they tend to hold their texture a lot better in a casserole than a flour tortilla does. Now, I know that some people really prefer flour tortillas, and I totally respect that. But what I have found is that flour tortillas, once they get totally saturated with liquid, they become kind of soggy and kind of like Play-Doh or something like that. So I just wanted to kind of show you the tortillas that I used so that you would know what I used, and then you can make modifications if you want. Now, I've also used wheat tortillas in place of corn, and using the wheat tortilla does hold its texture a little bit better than a regular flour tortilla. I want to put a layer of sauce on the bottom of this pan, and what that's going to do is it's going to keep everything just nice and loose on the bottom. And I also sprayed our pan with cooking spray before I did anything. So even though we're adding a liquid, it will still create sort of like a barrier. I mean, it's going to not be an easy pan to clean no matter what you do, but I just like to add a little bit of sauce on the bottom. So you put your tortilla on the bottom and you completely cover the bottom with 1 layer. Another nice thing about using corn tortillas instead of flour tortillas is that if you get some brands, they're going to be gluten-free. Okay, so now I've got 1 layer of moistened corn tortillas, and I'm going to put a layer of meat. I'm just going to use my hands here. Okay, so now I've got a layer of our meat over the top of the tortillas, and the next thing you're going to do is add a layer of cheese. Now, I like to use this Fiesta blend, or there's another one that I think they call Mexican blend. It's an easy mixture of cheeses, and it's delicious, and it's obviously a shortcut because I don't have to do the shredding. But typically, I know from growing up in California and eating Mexican food all my life, Monterey Jack tends to be the type of cheese that is used in a lot of recipes. And I, in the olden days, used to grate my own. And if you want to save a little bit of money, it is cheaper to do that, to buy your own cheese. So if you wanted to buy Monterey Jack and shred it yourself, you can do that. But I'm just going to use this to save myself a little time. And also keep in mind that you know, you can do different steps to this ahead of time. Like if I wanted to stop at this point and put all this stuff in the fridge and then build it, you know, tomorrow and bake it, I could totally do that. So you can make certain things ahead. You could even freeze the meat after it's been shredded and then do this recipe later. So it's just nice to know that you can do that. And now I am going to put another layer of sauce on top of the cheese. Okay, so I'm just gonna take a small measuring cup and just kind of drizzle that over the top. And that just, again, it gives our meat more moisture, and our cheese, our meat, and our tortillas, everything is just gonna melt together beautifully. And we're gonna do this twice. The next step is going to be more tortillas. So there's really not a right or wrong way to do the tortillas. You can tear them into pieces or do whatever to make them fit if you're funny about making sure that there's a straight side that's touching the side of the pan. So our second layer of meat is done, and I went ahead and used the rest of the meat. So this is just going to be a really meaty casserole. If you use less meat, it will be just fine. Just think to use half of the meat for each layer, since you're going to be doing 2 layers of meat. After the meat is done, you add a layer of cheese. This is a wonderfully cheesy dish. I've never met a person that didn't like this dish. Now there are non-dairy cheeses that you can buy, and when I made my non-dairy version recently for my coworker, I did buy some wonderful non-dairy cheese. It's just not going to melt the same way, but it tastes pretty good. She said she enjoyed it, so that made me happy. A little more sauce. Okay, so after your second layer of cheese, you're gonna go ahead and do one more layer of tortillas again, and then cover it one more time with cheese. So think of a rolled up enchilada. It's got tortilla on the bottom and tortilla on the top with stuff in the middle. So it's basically that. Now when you go shopping for corn tortillas, you're gonna notice that there is a white corn version and a yellow corn version, and either version is completely fine. Okay, now my last layer of tortillas is right on the top, so we're going to cover this with cheese, and then we're going to cover it with foil and put it in the oven at 375 degrees for 30 minutes, covered. The reason I do it that way is because I really want the cheese to melt. When you cover it with foil, it kind of holds heat in just a little bit better, and it helps everything to melt more nicely. But I like it to look toasty on the top. So after that 30 minutes, the top will hopefully be all melted, and I'll take off the foil, and sometimes I'll turn it up to 400, and then I'll let the top get nice and toasty, just a little bit golden brown and bubbly. Then I pull it out of the oven, and in theory, you should let it sit the way that you do lasagna. Oh heck, there's not enough here. I'm just gonna go ahead and use all this cheese. You let it sit so that it will serve more nicely. White rice goes really well with it because all of the sauce, it kind of goes into the rice, and it's a really nice pairing with it. So after you put this last layer of cheese on, before you put it in the oven, you can take this sauce and put a little bit more. I like to start with kind of the outside to make sure that there's plenty. Cover it and put it in the oven. Okay, so we are going to get ready to put this in the oven, and because there's cheese on top, of course, if we were to just put foil, it would stick. So what I like to do is I like to put toothpicks. And another thing that I've used is, you know when you order pizza and those plastic things are on top of your pizza in the pizza box? Save those. They're oven proof. You can put those on there, and it will keep the foil from touching the cheese. So it makes it a wonderful little tool to have. So we'll just put these on, and then we'll cover it with foil. So some of you guys might wonder why we cover this with foil, and the cheese melts a little bit better and a little into more of kind of a gooey melt when you cover it. So I like to cook it for 30 minutes first by doing that, and then taking the foil off and baking it a little longer to let it get brown on top. And you'll see that we have a whole nother pan here, and we use turkey for this one. So if you end up in this situation where you wind up having two pans, this is actually a wonderful thing to freeze. People buy Stouffer's lasagna and Stouffer's casserole. Stouffer's actually has a casserole that's kind of similar to this that you can buy, but you can freeze this thing and cook it in 3 months if you wanted to. So it's a great freezer meal. So it's been in the oven now for about 40 minutes. Let's take a look at it and make sure it's bubbling the way we want. What we want to look for, if you can see on the side, you can kind of see bubbles coming up, and you can even see it bubbling in the middle just a little bit. It's probably going to be melted in the middle. Let's take a look and make sure. Oh, also you notice we put a sheet pan underneath to make sure that any little drippies did not land on the bottom of the oven. Okay. Ooh, it looks melty and good. So let's take off this foil. Let's put this back in. And we're going to let this cook for about another 10 minutes, and I'm going to up the temperature to 400 degrees to give it that toasty, melty top. So it is finally ready, and you're probably wondering why I changed. I'm on my way out the door to go to a Christmas party, so sorry for the costume change, but let's take a look at it. It's looking brown and bubbly and delicious. Now, as I said before, if you let this sit and cool for about 30 minutes, it will serve much more nicely. It won't slide around. If you were to serve it now, it would be kind of blue. So it's up to you. But I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you at the next one. Hi, so you can see that our chicken is still simmering over there, and I decided to go ahead and make a second pan using our leftover turkey and gravy from Thanksgiving. And we would just stored it together, the turkey and the gravy right in here, and I just put it into a pan. I covered it with a little bit of water. I know that the meat is already cooked, so it doesn't have to simmer for very long, but what that boiling is going to do is going to give it that sort of fall apart off the bone kind of texture. Now I went ahead and just incorporated the gravy right in here in the pan, and I added some cumin to give it that sort of Mexican flavor. I added some garlic and I added some onion powder, but I didn't add any of that chicken bouillon because it's already got enough flavor from the gravy, but it's like converting that gravy into flavor toward the chicken enchilada casserole, except in this case, it's leftover turkey enchilada casserole. So the turkey meat that we have repurposed, it boiled for just a few minutes and then we shredded it, and it shredded up beautifully, as you can see. And I went ahead and added chilies to this turkey meat. And then I'm gonna take this gravy and I'm gonna add the green enchilada sauce to this to build our sauce for this pan to use our leftover turkey meat.